Does David sound weird to anybody else? Like,
you mean more than normal? Hello, and welcome to another episode of Plain Truth, a Holy Spirited podcast. I am Maggie Ulmer, and I am here with
Scott Kisker,
David Watson,
and our
Justus
special
Hunter.
guest today. Our special
Good job,
guest.
everyone.
Go ahead,
And Phil
Justus.
Tallon.
Oh, sorry. Dang it.
It's all
Nailed Justus.
right. We're
Nailed
going to roll with it.
Yeah,
This is
all
how
right.
it is now.
I'm a special guest, and my name is Justus Hunter, and there's another one.
Yeah, and I am Philip Tallon.
Excellent.
and he's also special.
and a guest.
We have
Most
a lot of
importantly,
special.
we're guests.
Mm-hmm. Just trying to distance yourself from this outfit. I understand personally. Well,
So,
welcome.
Justus,
We're glad
Justus.
you're here.
tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you? Where do you work? What do you do?
Well, David, I am the assistant professor of church history at United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. And that's what I do.
I've heard of that place.
Once or twice.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
How about you?
With Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm an assistant professor of theology at Houston Baptist University in heart of Houston, Texas. And I do a couple things here. Right now, I'm the interim dean for the School of Christian Thought, which includes a seminary. And we have a whole range of undergraduate and graduate programs. And so if you are unable to go to United, you should think about coming to Houston Baptist.
Especially if you're Baptist.
I typically try and write about the intersection of theology and the arts. So I have a book out called The Poetics of Evil on evil and theological aesthetics. And I also wrote The Absolute Basics of the Christian Faith and co-wrote a book that we're going to talk about today.
Woohoo.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Justus, what is that book that we're talking about?
It's called The Absolute Basics of the Wesleyan. Basically, Phil's book, Absolute Basics of the Christian Faith, covers the basics of the beliefs that all Christians share. And we wanted to do a book that was more focused on what makes sort of the peculiar, distinctive Wesleyan way of believing and living the Christian faith. So that's what it is. It kind of walks you through there.
So is it all about the quadrilateral then?
Oh, dear.
There is approximately
Just
zero
four
mentions. Yeah,
Approximately.
yeah, the index has no mention of the quadrilateral.
And it's better for it, really.
I already like the book.
Sold.
So how did you two come together on this project, Phil? Would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Well, I've known Justus for a long time, and so some years back, I was working at a church, and I was in charge of confirmation, and I couldn't find any good material, and so I wrote The Absolute Basics of the Christian Faith, and then Seedbed expressed interest and picked up the work that I'd done, and we reworked it, and we did the videos and published that, and then it was, I don't know, 4 years ago or something, and this was after WTS, I think, up in Kentucky.
It was at Asbury that year. Wesleyan
Yeah.
Theological Society.
Yeah, it was the best attended year, recent record as far as I could tell. And we went out for pizza afterward and pitched Justus the idea of doing a sequel that I'd been asking for on Wesleyan distinctives as a companion volume for the Absolute Basics of the Christian Faith. And Justus very foolishly said yes.
I've regretted it ever since.
And do you guys intend both of these books sort of to be used in catechesis, so confirmation classes, and is that sort of the idea?
Yeah, one thing that we discovered when we were thinking about and started asking people around about Absolute Basics of the Christian Faith and how they were using it, we discovered that a good kind of confirmation targeted book actually can serve a lot of purposes in the church. A lot of people use it for new member classes, adult Sunday school. It actually just turns out, especially in the Wesleyan tradition, our part of it, everyone pretty much needs to be catechized again properly and repeatedly, but also
Or just for the first time.
Right, or the first time. But also, I think there's something about when you teach these things, just teach the basics with clarity. You can't do too much either. I teach the same thing in doctrine every year, and I learn new things all the time. So I think there's a lot of uses for the book, but definitely it would serve very well as a confirmation curriculum book.
Yeah, it's not written specifically or exclusively as a confirmation curriculum or even as a curriculum per se. What we really wanted to do was provide just material that was clearly organized, and sort of systematic in going through key doctrines or key elements of Wesleyan history and teaching, and to make it really accessible, so be accessible for young people. So there are a lot of illustrations and analogies and literal illustrations in the text, and so I think the goal was to have something that was rigorous and serious in its underlying structure and purpose, but was as friendly as possible to kind of take people into a discussion of big important things.
So when you were looking for confirmation material, what was it that you found was missing?
Yeah, so a good long time ago, I did my level best to find material that was already out there, and so I reviewed and purchased the United Methodist Publishing House confirmation material, which at the time was called Credo. They've since released it as, I think it's called Confirm now, but that wasn't out at the time. Though if it was at the time, I wouldn't have used it. But I was very disappointed with a lot of the material that I found for young people. Either it didn't go deep enough and sort of take seriously, a sort of straightforward teaching of Christian doctrine, or more likely, and this is especially the case for the Methodist curriculum, there was a sort of sweaty nervousness that was shot through the entire thing, and I apologize to anyone who might be listening who is involved in the construction of that. But this is
probably a sweaty, nervous person, though.
Yeah, they'll feel extra bad about it. But it was. I think so much of there. I don't know. There's a kind of tone to some material directed toward young people. I think this is especially the case with some confirmation curriculum to really sort of ask questions. Well, what do you think about this? As a kind of way of provoking discussion. And I think that if Bonhoeffer talks about grace, that's sort of a cheap accommodation to a younger learner. It attempts to gain some connection, but at the expense of the truly reassuring things we want to give to confirmands, a sense of depth to what they believe, trustworthiness, authoritative confidence, and the deeper joy that you find on the kind of the far side of a difficult learning process. And so the new material, I think, suffers from very much the same thing as well. It's as if the goal is to provoke a kind of an existential experience in the young person where they get to think about, they get through the process of thinking and talking, but they don't really gain any real learning as far as I can see. And so I wanted to provide something that was more confident and serious, but also still very accessible with pictures and analogies and that sort of thing.
Well, we ask questions too, but ours are like, how would your life look different if you tried to live according to the methods that John Wesley practiced? These are the types of questions we want to push kids to think about.
Yeah, I mean, the dilemma of asking someone who's that age or whatever, what do you think about the Trinity? Is it leads them to believe that there's nothing out there but my own subjective confusion, right? That's what I'm left with, and I mean, certainly at that stage in one's life, it would be somewhat reassuring for someone to say, well, no, your current confusion about absolutely everything is not all there is.
Right. I think it's interesting because I'm a mom of an older teenager and a sort of an almost 16-year-old now at this point, and then I have a soon-to-be 10-year-old. So I've been involved in various, Sunday school environments and teaching and certainly confirmation classes. And I always found it fascinating when we would get to that point where we would say, well, what do you think? And I think a lot of adults would leave that experience thinking, oh, these kids are just uninterested. And I always thought, well, maybe they just have nothing to push up against. Like the question, what do you think, is kind of a huge question when you have no, as Scott says, context of wisdom, learning, understanding. You need hard things to bump up against so that you can discover, well, what do I think about the Trinity? Well, somebody's got to explain it to me first.
Well, I think I'd sometimes talk about maybe that there's a duality in the term confirmation or to confirm, which is that I think that a catechetical or an initiative process which merely tries to get people to sort of confirm for themselves what they believe seems like it'll just be locked kind of hopelessly in. It won't provide any sort of real transformation, but a process whereby the church tries to confirm in the person who's joining to real learning and intention to sort of be part of a community of transformation, that does have real promise for genuine transformation. And so, so I think in the process of catechesis is this echoing process. I say this thing and then I hear it back from you. Mm-hmm. It begins with the sort of kingly authoritative voice of the church, and then proceeds outwards towards the idiots, and then we expect something back in return. And while I think that there's a lot more pastorally that's involved in really kind of accommodating and caring for people as they come in through this, I don't want to sound like I'm just sort of a stern old schoolmaster here. I think without that confirmation is really doomed to fail without that confidence.
Yeah, I don't think you sound that way. And frankly, I've been in some confirmation environments where a stern schoolmaster would have been okay.
Justus says.
Yeah, that's when we send Justus into the room.
I struggle with keeping order.
So I'm just wondering, you've already published the absolute basics of the Christian faith, and I'm wondering what is the feedback that you've seen from that, and do you have expectations for how this book will be received?
Yeah, well, I've been pleased. Most of the feedback that I've gotten has been positive. That you seems like it's proved to be useful. I didn't ever expect that this would even be a book that I would write. I just kind of stumbled across a need, and so it seems like it's been taken up very widely, especially by people who are sort of in my niche of the Wesleyan world, which is kind of evangelical Wesleyans, and so it's I hear from people a lot that they're adopting the curriculum, they're using it. It's used in the Methodist Church and outside. So it's been a really a light to sort of stumble across people that are using it. We in Houston, when we moved here, we were looking for a church, and so we went to a church that had a youth ministry, and I just said, what do you do for confirmation? They said, we use this book, The Absolute Basics of the Christian Faith. I said, well, I wrote that book, and so I guess I like what you're doing.
Nice. It's confidence inspiring.
And so that's very pleasing. The real goal is just to create material that be of use to the church as a matter of service. And I think Justus feels the same way. Neither of us expect us to do a lot for our academic reputations. Probably not even anything particularly good for our reputations within the United Methodist Church, but
entirely likely.
That's why I came on this podcast, to ensure. I think that's right. I expect that the book will be picked up and used by Methodist churches. I hope that it will help. My hope is that it will be used to help congregations knit together kind of a common set of kind of vocabulary and ideas that they can all kind of then build together and then grow upon, and then hopefully this is just something that launches a lot more resourcing. We need a lot more resourcing than just the absolute basics.
I mean, I have to admit that I really did like. I mean, I looked through your sort of 12 lessons or whatever, your 12 chapters, kind of briefly, and the breakdown of a sort of brief history, and then the way of salvation, and then sacraments, classes, and bands. I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's like the basics. If you've got that, you at least know when you're not a Methodist. You know what I mean? Like you've like figured out that, okay, this is the stuff that makes us a little bit weird, and that's good.
One of the cool things about working on the book was, it's divided into three parts: history, doctrine, which is really focused on the way of salvation, the doctrine of grace, and then practices. And one of the cool things that we saw, you kind of key in really tight on what do people really need to kind of get going on this stuff, so that they'll know, okay, I was raised in the Baptist church, now I've become a United Methodist or a Wesleyan or a Nazarene or whatever. What is this new world? How is it different from what I know? We wanted to answer those types of questions. One of the cool things that happened, I think, was that we saw there's such deep coherence between all three of those topics, actually. Wesley's life, the way in which he laid out the way of grace, and then the practices he designed and handed down and that have been central to the Methodist Church. They all form like an interlocking, coherent web of ideas that sort of hinge on one another and hang together. And I think really, I was really pleased, actually, with the last product when I read through it recently again. It's like, wow, you really do get kind of the key web of beliefs and practices, and you see how the skeleton holds together, or the web holds together. And I think that's really valuable.
What about you, David? What are you thinking over there?
I'm just thinking, I'm so grateful that a book like this has come out. And it seems like more and more scholars in the Methodist tradition are getting serious about the particularity of their own tradition. I mean, the United Methodist Church hasn't been especially strong in the area of emphasizing the particularity of Methodism. And that, for a variety of reasons, I mean, I think a lot of people realize that hasn't worked out that well, and that there are treasures that we need to recover in our tradition, and books like this help us to do that. I really think that going forward, any form of vibrant Methodism is going to be involved in a very intentional process of recovery. There are things we've lost in our tradition that used to make us who we are. And without those, we become one of two things. We become either sort of beige liberal Protestant or kind of bland American evangelical. And neither of those things is, in my mind, a sufficient description of what a Methodist is. So I want to commend you two authors on your work and helping to form both adults and kids in the particularities of our tradition. That's really important.
Yeah, I think there one thing that we use to make this book very peculiarly Wesleyan is we devoted an entire chapter to entire sanctification. We actually that was a change. We had laid it out a little differently, but as we were writing it, we just thought, let's give a whole chapter to our grand deposit, and it orients everything else also very nicely. The whole thing makes more sense with that devoted attention to that. And also, I think another piece that we offer is an insight into the heavy emphasis on repentance and therefore sin in our tradition is fundamental. Repentance before justifying grace, repentance after, and continuing on in the process of sanctification. Those things really help us piece together the way of salvation, and then key practices like bands, for instance, fit within that picture.
Yeah,
How do you?
that was also something I really appreciated with both of those things. The chapter on convincing grace, basically, which always gets left out, right? You just go with preventing, justifying, sanctifying, as if we never have to be convicted of sin at all. And then entire sanctification, where it's just, just dive right in, right? We're weird. This is what we think, right? It's, let's not pretend. God actually wants to make saints. It's okay.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me in talking about kind of a unifying theme, and I think one of our repeated motifs, is that there's a sort of, I don't know, scruffy ambitiousness to the Wesleyan movement, right? I mean, it's ambitious in that it wants for individuals to allow God to do more than they think might be possible. Like, let's go further, let God go deeper. There's more grace to be had. And then there's also this ambitiousness to go out, but to go out not and sort of to become sort of the most respectable brand on the market, but to go out and, be willing to be disrespected as long as you're genuinely reaching people. It's this sort of shabby but vibrant movement that, explodes around the world. And I think that, so much of the work of recovery, in a way, to piggyback off what David said, is to sort of re-enchant the peculiar place that Wesleyanism occupies. Sort of not too high, not too low. It's reformed, but not in these other ways. It's this sort of very unique kind of blend that I think it can be easy to overlook, and so we wanted to I don't know, sprinkle a little bit of kind of salt on that and kind of feed that to young people so they understand what it means to be Methodist Wesleyan.
Yeah, I think a lot of Methodists don't realize that in the general rules, one of the requirements is submitting to bear the reproach of Christ, to be as the filth and offscouring of the world.
Oh, wow.
So
Totally added to the membership vows.
Yeah.
I was going to say, that should totally be.
The offscouring of the world. I mean, it is Paul.
It could be your seminary slogan.
Do you submit to be more vile?
Everyone already thinks that about us, so it's
yeah. That's a good idea, actually. Thank you. I will bring that up in the executive staff meeting.
See how that goes over.
Float that balloon. Watch the archers.
Yeah.
So, one of the interesting things that, as a pastor's wife, I've encountered are people who are completely just ignorant to the sort of the strangeness of Methodism. You do, as Scott sort of said, you sort of tend to encounter liberal Protestantism or bland, or who said that, David? I don't know. They all kind of blend together for me. But you do encounter either this liberal Protestantism or evangelical sort of vanilla. And it's interesting. I'm excited for this book to sort of make its way out into the Methodist body and to see what happens. I think that there have been books that have come out in the last few years that have been moving towards recovery of Methodist particularities, deeper and more challenging catechesis, and people always have interesting responses. Like I think about Scott's book, Scott and Kevin's book, The Band Meeting. Talking about that with people and having them be like, "Oh no, I would never confess my sins in a group of people," and having them think that not only is that strange, but that it's even not biblical. And whenever these strange things about Methodism come up, like entire sanctification or the ordering of how grace operates, how Wesley sort of understands it and communicates it, people will often say, "Oh, well, that's not biblical." And I'll be like, "Well, no, it is. Completely. It's okay.
Those would be fighting words for Wesley.
I know.
You told him he was not biblical.
Yes.
He ticked off.
But I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the conversations, and yeah.
I'm trying to think if we're open to these objections in the book. I don't know. I mean, we cite a fair bit of scripture throughout the text. And nicely, I think, we plug Scott's book and Scott and Kevin's book on the bands pretty hard towards the end as kind of a good next step.
Yeah.
Because I really think, those distinctive practices and distinctive beliefs are really what Methodism needs to get serious about. Also, we need to rebuild the foundation because at least, American Methodism is completely deteriorated in its foundation. I mean, until we can stand up and say the Nicene Creed straightforwardly and wholeheartedly together, then there's not really much.
Without crossing your fingers.
You can have all the particularities you want kind of build the foundation, or else it's probably going to crumble. The walls are going to fall apart eventually. But yeah, I don't know what the response will be. Who knows? Maybe they'll burn us at the stake, Phil. I don't know. I don't expect that.
I am at a Baptist school. They can't hurt me here.
You're all right.
How do you deal with demonic possession in the book?
Dilly, will take that
one. David.
Yeah, we talk about baptism, and it's something that every baptism is an exorcism. There's that.
There you go.
Also, do you cover the period in Wesley's life where he prayed over Mr. Merrick and Mr. Merrick came back from the dead? So I feel like that's important and an underappreciated moment in Wesley's life.
We're waiting for you to write that book, David.
Mm-hmm.
The absolute basics, raising the dead.
Doesn't seem to be anything terribly basic about that.
Healed too once.
He what?
What's that?
I think he healed his horse once too.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. So it feels like you left some things out. Is all I'm saying.
They're going for the absolute basics. Let's not overwhelm people on day one. It's hard enough to just be a Christian. And on top of it, you also have to commit to be more vile and
horse raising.
Yeah.
I want to know, what's next on the writing calendar for you guys?
Oh, yeah.
Next?
Well, I've got a contract. I have a co-author for a contract on a book coming out from Lexham Press. Indeterminate point in the future, because I've stepped in as interim dean and I have not found deaning and writing to go well together.
You need associate deans.
True. More administration. I just need some more administration here. But I have a book. It could not be more different than what we just did. It's a book on horror movies and theology, and so it should be coming out sometime in the next few years. Its title is Cinema Inferno: How Horror Movies Can Save Your Soul, and we're using horror as a way of kind of interrogating some of our contemporary cultural kind of myths and pieties, and showing ways that it actually challenges some of our kind of culture's way of seeing the world in ways that are helpful.
I mean, isn't it basically, if you're a teenager, don't have sex, don't go in the basement, and don't split up?
Don't go camping, I guess.
Camping is also generally a bad life choice. Yeah.
And also exorcisms can work. A priest or two might die in the process.
You're gonna make an omelet,
Yeah, David. Yeah, David. We do talk about exorcism in the horror book, David.
I bet.
Good. Any raising of the dead?
Yes, that happens a fair amount.
That sounds like an interesting book. I mean, I can't watch horror films, but
why not?
Phil only writes interesting things. I'm working on a book on John Duns Scotus, so
I'm sure that will sell equally as many copies.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Why can't I watch horror films? Because I can't do anything about what's happening. When I'm actually praying deliverance, I'm participating. I'm not afraid.
So you should play horror video games then.
No,
So
absolutely not. 100% no.
You can shoot the zombies, yeah.
No. I mean, not to be.
Pop some zombies.
Yeah, no.
So would you attend a horror musical like Evil Dead the musical? That's my question.
I mean,
Is that a horror?
first you're gonna have to like talk to me about going to musicals.
Sweeney Todd.
Yeah. Well, so
I would go to.
My background is in performing arts and theater, and so I when you were first saying, Phil, that you talk a lot about the intersection of aesthetics and theology, I find that really interesting. My father was a visual artist, a painter, and anyway, but no, Sweeney Todd, I was in that musical, but
that's a horror musical.
It is incredibly gruesome, and there's no redemption whatsoever in it. It's tragic.
Also, Cats.
That's horrific for a different reason. Just terrible.
It was a horror.
I can't watch horror films.
Well, it's essential to the whole thing that you're not empowered, right? I learned this. My brother made me play this horror video game with him, and I started playing it, and I was like, why do I move so slowly and I can't turn unless I stop? And he said, oh, they designed that into the game so that you're frustrated, and and it makes you even more scared because you can't do what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think because I actually pray deliverance with people, that is like a thing I do regularly. I don't think I could handle that. I mean, I don't think it would be good for me.
Yeah, I think it's not a bad point. That I think there is something about the current interest in horror that reveals perhaps a sort of a decadence in our contemporary situation, which is that we're so removed from some of the kind of more serious problems in life that we have this we need this, I don't know, epistemological vitamin of horror to reacquaint us with some of the sort of harsher realities of life. And so, but if you live and work in the midst of genuine suffering and difficulty, if you encounter horrors, then it may have much less value to you.
Yes. I don't
already
need
work
it to
at
be in my
United.
entertainment. Definitely don't need it to be part of my entertainment. But and you are working on another book, or just a book about Duns Scotus. Didn't you already write a book? No, you wrote.
Scotus was the last figure in the book that I just published. That's right. Mm-hmm. So this is just in its first flowering, but
infancy.
Yeah, it will come along, and no one will care that much except my 5 friends who I care a lot about. So
that sounds like pressure to buy a book.
Yeah, 4 of us are on the call.
I know.
Yeah, we basically just wrote the absolute basics of the Wesleyan Way to get approval from you and get on this podcast. So that's mission accomplished.
Justus, if you need a blurb for the back, call me.
Sounds good, Dave.
Well, I share David's sentiments of gratitude. I'm very grateful for this new resource, and
pre-order now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seedbed.com. You can find us on Twitter, and we'll post links as things come out. It'll be out by the end of the year.
All right. And are you interested in plugging your social media handles or anything like that to our listeners so that they can follow your future publications? And
my name is Philip Tallon, and my Twitter handle is Philip Tallon, PhilipTallon.
Awesome.
And I'm Justus Hunter,
right.
JUSTUS Hunter. That's my Twitter handle.
Right on. Okay. There you go. You guys go follow them on Twitter. You will find many just enlightening and, dare I say, entertaining interactions and tweets to read. And I think that's been our podcast for today. Give us a follow on Twitter at Holy Spirit Pod. Follow Spirit and Truth at Spirit Truth Life. Rate and like the podcast because it helps people find us. And you guys, if you haven't checked out Firebrand Magazine yet, it's our online magazine related a Ministry of Spirit and Truth. Please do that and follow us on Twitter there at Firebrand Mag. All right, that's been our podcast for today. United Theological Seminary, we miss your recording studio so much. And yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Have a great day, y'all. That's it.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.